So what would be an example of an impurity? That, I mean, you're not wrong about this. Kind of going off of also what Nietzsche said about positivity. Yeah.
Maybe when you find out that one of your family members is a narcissist.
Okay.
So you try to figure out what to do. Maybe like your mom is a narcissist. You try to figure out ways to maybe avoid them, or but that's the impurity.
Okay. So what's the danger of having a narcissist in your life?
Narcissist. Someone who's very self-centered, so they don't think about you. They just think about themselves. How to benefit with them. So.
And that's a deficiency in narcissists, right? They should stop thinking about themselves so much and start thinking about me. Because I'm obviously the most important person in the room. Yeah. There's a reason I had the desks pointed this way. Because I made a comment one time to my students about being the most important person in the room. And I said, you can tell because, when the instructor's in the room, everyone's facing forward. So you know who the most important person in the room is. Everyone's facing that person. And one of my students was sitting there, he turned his desk towards the center of the room. I'm like, that's funny. So now who's the most important person in the room? Somebody on that side. We're always staring at each other. I'm just over here off to the side. In fact, it's uncomfortable to watch me because you have to turn your body or turn your head around to see this way. So now we're thinking about some of the impurities that he might be talking about here. Now the polluted, the C's, I think we can get that one. It's pretty straightforward. But the rest of it is, it's just the implication of it. It's the implication of it. So what I mean by that is, how much negative influence do you have to take in your life before you become negative?
A lot.
Is it a lot?
That depends. It is a lot.
Depends on what?
It depends whether how you view it. If you're a big C or a small C.
And how do you know if you're a big C or if you're a small C?
Maybe if you get in your cheese.
I really mean that question. I really mean that question because a narcissist would say, oh, I'm a huge C. I can take in all kinds of things without being influenced. But if you look at this person, you'll notice that they dress like most other people. They talk like most other people. They behave like most other people, except that they're louder about saying, I can't be influenced as much as other people. Yeah. And so I wonder how it is, because even when we say, a person gets mad too easily, I don't know, how easily should a person get mad? Those are weird things to try to quantify. Like when you say, oh man, you take things too seriously. Well, what's the level of how seriously we should take something? And we might say, well, it depends on the thing. Yeah, but it's a weird thing for us to sit in judgment of somebody else and say, well, I know, not even sit in judgment of another person, but sit in judgment of the whole of existence, of being, and say, I know what too seriously is. I know where the lines on certain things are. It's a weird thing for us to sit there. And of course, we all think that we know it, but isn't that another extension of narcissism? To say, I kind of know what's best for everybody else. I know what these proper lines are. And especially if we start to think that at a very young age, it's a weird thing. Isn't it like at 15 years old, if you have somebody who's like, I know what right and wrong is. They might know that, but they might say, I know what the best way to go about this is. I know how seriously we should take these. I know what's funny and what's not. And we might sit there and shake our heads and go, oh man, we're 18. Those 15-year-olds are crazy. They have no idea what they're talking about. They haven't lived yet. Wait till they live the next 3 years. Then they'll really understand. But then you'll find people who are in their 30s who will say the same thing about people in their 20s. You'll find people in their 50s who will say the same thing about people in their 30s. I remember when I was 30, somebody in their 50s referred to me as a baby. Oh, you're still a baby. I'm like, really? This is good. This is good to know. Of course, there are people who are in their 30s who really are still babies. And there are people in their 60s who are still babies. And there are people in there who are 15 who are fully grown, have the deep shadows in the eyes that Yeats has talked about. So he's talking about about being a C. How much influence you have to have. And the reason I say it's an uncomfortable thing is because it forces us to think about the kinds of influences that we allow into our lives. And we might think like, oh, negative people. I'm not talking about negative people. What kind of media do you consume? What's the music that you're listening to? What are the movies that you're watching? What's the social media stuff that you're watching? What are the videos that you're watching online? How much of all of that can you take in and truly believe it doesn't influence your character at all? And it's also worth considering, why is it that you pursue that music? So for example, this is like a few years ago now, but I was asking one of the students, we were talking about different something else, and a student brought up gangster rap, and he was like, oh, I can listen to that, and I'm not affected by that. I'm like, really? You don't listen to it? You know, like, kind of go along with it? He's like, no. I go, and I asked the question, have you ever listened to Christian hip-hop, Christian rap? And he gave the same reaction some of you guys just did. Oh my God, what? Well, if it's just about the beat, I just like the beat. If it's just about the beat, why would you recoil from somebody asking you if you listen to Christian hip-hop, Christian rap? If it's just the beat. Because we intuitively know it's not just the beat. It's a whole bunch of other things. It's a catharsis. It's a persona that we can live through. It's a lifestyle that fascinates us. As much as we say, no, I'm not, come on, man, seriously? When's the last time that you really went and searched for what's the best Christian hip-hop? What's the best, Jewish hip-hop, Jewish reggae? What's the best, fill in the blank, Buddhist rap? I'm sure it's out there. But that's the thing, because we know it really is about what's being said. That's at least part of it. And you might like the beats. You might like the beats. In fact, I'm thinking of a guy from San Diego who makes that kind of music. And I don't know, not my thing, but I played it for a friend of mine, and he liked it, and he liked it. I asked people, but it was a live performance. And then he listened to the lyrics. He's like, why is he talking about Jesus? I don't know. I wasn't listening to that. I was just listening to the beat. And then, of course, the message sets in. He's like, oh man, no, that's not my thing. Why not? Why is it that WAP is not offensive to you, to your sensibilities, but religious music is? But I'm not religious. Are you this other thing? Does that represent you? Because if so, I guess there is some stuff for us to talk about in terms of our character. What about the music that we listen? I'm sorry, the movies that we watch. What kind of things draw us towards them? I wonder how many of us will watch terrible videos online of like people who've been in car accidents and people who've been shot to death, and they'll watch those cartel torture videos. How much of that do you honestly believe that you can take in and still remain a pure seed? Now again, the narcissist will say, all of it. I'm not affected by that. But I guess I'd ask the question, what does affect you? And I mean that genuinely. What do you think does affect you? If it's not social influence, if it's not the media that you consume. And even then, maybe the media that you're consuming you might think doesn't influence me, maybe it just reflects who I am. Oh, shoot. That's even more uncomfortable. It reflects who I am, it reflects my own feelings and beliefs, I don't know. If you're let's say that you're standing next to me at a pool, and I look over at you, and I give you this weird smile, and you go, what's up, Dr. Scanlon? I just peed in here. Yeah. Now, how far away from me are you going to try to get? Out. Probably maybe out of the pool. That's gross. Shake the pee off of you, I guess. And I'd be like, oh, whatever, man. You're a small sea. You're just a pool. It doesn't take a lot of pee to contaminate a pool. In fact, think about how big a pool is. And as you walk out to the pool and you see someone standing on the edge peeing into the pool, look back at you, give that smile, and they dive in the pool. Are you diving in that pool with them? Maybe, hell yeah. I'm going to prove them. I'm a man of will. Probably not. It might affect you in a very negative way to see that. And now you might think like, well, what if I just don't know it? Oh, yeah, that's even worse. Because now you're swimming around in a thing that you don't even know is there. Now, let's say that instead of standing in a pool, we're standing over at Ocean Beach. We're standing in the water. And the same thing, you're a little bit of distance from me, maybe from here to the cart. And I say the same thing. Guess what? But I just peed in the ocean. Are you trying to swim as far away as possible again? Or are you just like, oh, God, what the hell? You're peeing everywhere, dude. What the hell? Yeah, because when you're in the ocean, it doesn't impact you quite the same way as when you're in a pool. And that's a big, important part of knowing who we are. Because if we know who we are, we know how big of an ocean or a sea or a stream or a pool we are. Because then we can guard ourselves. You know, if you know that you've got something really precious and valuable inside of your house, you're probably going to do everything that you can to protect it. You put up every barrier that you can to make sure nothing comes in and takes it away. I guess I would ask if we believe that there's something valuable and precious inside of ourselves. And I wonder if we really believe that, if we should be guarding it. In fact, forget that. Imagine if you had children and you loved them very deeply. Would you want to protect them from that kind of an influence? And I know people will say things like, they're going to hear it anyway. Don't make me make a list of things that kids are going to experience eventually in life anyway. It doesn't mean necessarily that you should experience them at 6 years old or 10 years old. You know? It's like, I'll mention anyway, I'm sure some of you probably know a person who does, if I'll mention it anyway. Like people who, for some reason, feel the need to hang a pair of plastic testicles from the back of their trucks. You know? What the hell? It's a weird thing. If somebody shows you a pair of plastic ones, it's like, ugh. But then if someone shows you a real pair, and then we kind of call the cops. It's the same object, you know? So it's like, well, one's real, but one's not. And the idea is the same. You're exposing them to the same image. Why is it that we look at this one and go, nah, that's just funny? Yeah, it is funny. There's lots of stuff that's funny. But does that mean that we should be showing it in places where little kids are? They're going to see them anyway. Yeah, then I'm like, whoa. Yeah, I'll leave the uncle and priest jokes out of it at this point. Right? But you can imagine. But you can imagine. You know, but there's something that's precious and valuable inside of those kids, and I wonder if maybe we should be putting up walls to protect them. Because they're, at least certainly, even if you're a sea or an ocean, you have to acknowledge that they're not. They're a kiddie pool at this point. You know? And so we expose them to these things. And then if we can acknowledge that little kids can be exposed to these things and be influenced, we have to acknowledge that we can too. You know? Are we? And then so again, know yourself. Are you a pool? Are you an ocean? Are you a sea? You know, it's like I've told you before. Well, there's a really good reason I don't do drugs, because I know myself. If I did drugs, I would do all of them.
Yep.
You know? Yeah, all at once. Yeah, bring them all. Bring a plate. There's a reason I don't drink. Because if I drank, I would drink it all. I would go down to the store and just go, yeah. I would think, dude, I can afford this. Let me get one of everything. See which one I like the most. I know myself. And so if you know yourself, you don't want to put, you know yourself better than to put yourself in certain situations. But that's the problem. Like we run this danger where we run this gauntlet of danger where we think like, I can't be affected by this. And then we run down this gauntlet and once in a while we get tagged, but the problem is sometimes people pee in the pool and you don't even realize that they did it. This is only if you're aware of it. But how often is that happening? Because we live in a society where that stuff is just everywhere. It's the air that we breathe, it's the water that we swim in. We just don't even notice the influence that's there. And we do justify it and say, yeah, you know, times change. Times change. Do you think the Romans thought the same thing? No. You don't think that that's a quick answer. Do you think the Romans thought that? Like when they saw their culture degenerating and eventually the Roman Empire collapses, do you think that the people all along the way were saying, well, times just change. Yeah, but we're headed for a really bad place as a society, as a culture. Hey, that's not true. We're different than who came before us. Times change. Do you think the Byzantines thought the same thing? Do you think the Assyrians thought the same thing? Do you think you go all the way through history and think of a lot of cultures that are no longer here? And I wonder if all along the way they were marching towards their demise saying, times change. Things are different now. Now, we're not going to make the same mistakes as the past. I wonder how many of those cultures thought of themselves as massive seas and oceans, such that their narcissism is what led to them becoming polluted. You know? Know yourself, I suppose. You know? And then it gets very difficult, of course. Because now you got to kind of face the fact, and we associate it with weakness. Like, oh, I'm weak in this one area. It's so weird. Like as a culture where we celebrate victims and we celebrate people who are weak. We look at weakness as a virtue. It's a strange thing. Like, you've got people who make their careers on YouTube out of every single video beginning with, as you know, I'm dyslexic, or as you know, I've learned this. Going, who the hell cares? Right? It's going to be mentioned every single video because you get points for being, oh, you're so brave for acknowledging this. I don't know that you're brave for acknowledging the truth. Maybe you're brave if you overcome it. Maybe you're brave if you don't lean on it. But we should also be honest with ourselves about those deficiencies. We just shouldn't celebrate the deficiencies. You should burn away anything that's not worthy of you should go away. Any characteristic of yourself that's not worthy to represent you should go away. We should burn it away. Keep only those things that are worthy to represent you. But I don't know how much I influence people let in. And again, you're probably right. It probably depends heavily on the person and the personality.
And you won't unless you try.
And you won't know unless you try. Yeah. What are the dangers of trying?
You could die.
Oh, shit. Okay, I was talking about watching a movie. Yeah, I mean, there are things in life that if you try them, you could die. True. And there are things in life that you could try that can cause you to die emotionally and psychologically, even if not physically.
But then you'll know, okay, I can't do that then. You'll finally figure out, okay, that's my limit.
But do you know?
Well, I mean, if you're psychologically impacted, wouldn't you be like, okay, well, that hurt me, or that did something to me?
Can you tell me about the psychologically traumatic events that shaped your life?
That would shape my life.
Well, I'm asking you to do it. I'm asking you, could you?
Probably, because I don't think I've ever experienced anything.
You never experienced anything. Then no, the answer is no then.
So then,
Because those things happen before 5, typically. So what that means is that they go into your unconscious. You don't remember them. They're playing at you at unconscious level. This is what I'm saying. That sometimes there are things that are so I guess consider this. How do we go from Chopin to Wa culturally?
how would you?
How would you go? Or just look at the history of degeneration?
Well, no, I'm saying, tell me, because I'm not really.
Think of classical music. How do you go from classical music to what we have now?
I mean, it could be technology.
But there's something that's happened all along those ways. There are all kinds of steps that led us to that. That people initially would go listen to Beethoven and go, that's pretty good. Or even some people would be like, oh, that's not his best. And then and people go from that to Cardi B. Nothing against Cardi B, right? Nothing against Cardi B. Cardi B is, I listen to it as well. But I'm asking, like, culturally had to go from that to that and believe that there's been no mass psychosis that's happened. That's the thing. That's the shoulder shrug. We don't, because I would suggest to you that we don't typically think about those things because it's the water that we swim in. It's just like, this is one of the really nefarious things about psychological trauma. Psychological trauma does not just have to be, when you're 5 years old, your dad punches you in the face and says, I wish you'd never been born. It doesn't necessarily have to happen that way. It happens in these subtle ways that we think are completely normal. Like, if you ask most psychologically traumatized people if they're psychologically traumatized, they won't even realize that they are. Because for them, it's the water that they swim in, it's the air that they breathe. They just don't even realize that that's not what normal is. I'm sure some of you guys, I just saw a post yesterday from a friend of mine, but I'm sure some of you guys have seen these posts about people saying things like, in my old relationships, they'll talk about how terrible it was, and they go, I didn't even realize until my current relationship it was normal for a person to, be honest with you, let's say, or whatever. There are all kinds of people who are like this. They just don't realize that that's a norm. Like, for example, former friend of mine, would tell me stories about how some of her earlier memories were being her mom. So she was from TJ, and if you guys know, if you go up and down Avenue dos Mil in TJ, you have the hotels on the side of the road. And if you know, then you know. Those are all rented by the hour. And so she said that some of her earlier memories were being with her mom and her aunt, going from hotel to hotel on Valentine's Day, looking for her dad, because her mom knew that her dad was with somebody else on that day. And she remembers going around and doing all these things. And she also remembers going with her dad and looking for her mom in certain places because so she grew up in a family where cheating, it was violent, it was abusive, not necessarily physically, like not punching a lot, but she remembers that like arguing and fighting. She remember a time she was telling me that she was with her boyfriend, and her boyfriend broke up with her because they fought too much. I asked her, how often were you fighting? She's like once a day. And I'm like, once a day? She's like, well, yeah, but couples fight. That's what they do. And then you kind of work things out. I'm like, that's a lot of fighting. But she wasn't, but she meant that too. She was serious. She was just like, well, I mean, that's not too much. And then when she was with somebody else, she said that they barely ever fought. And I go, how often do you fight? And she said like 3, 4, 5 times a week. You know, and by fight, she didn't just mean like, oh, they disagreed about where to eat. She meant like yelling and all that stuff. And it was just normal for her. And I really do genuinely mean that. It was normal for her. And it wasn't until she went through therapy and everything, and she sorted out a bunch of stuff, that she finally came to the realization, like, huh, that's not normal. You know? I'm thinking of, on my desk I have a little crystal globe over there with a green carnation in it. It's the oldest thing I have that a friend of mine gave me a very long time ago. And that friend of mine, we still talk. We grew up together. And I remember she got married when she was 16 years old. And the reason she got married was because, actually no, I'm sorry, she was 17. Sorry, she was 17. Because her grandmother, who's from Mexico, like, village Mexico, was giving her crap over being so old and not married yet. Because what was her grandmother's experience? You get married at 15, 16 years old, somebody within the village, all that stuff. So she got convinced, she went down and she found a husband. They got married and all that. And I remember talking to her and asking her, like, what are you thinking? And she said, all there are in Echo Park are gangsters and nerds. That's all that exists in the world, gangsters and nerds. And if you grew up where we grew up, you pretty much just stayed in that little enclave of Los Angeles. We didn't really venture too much outside of there. I mean, we were like maybe, I don't know, 6 miles from the beach, and I had friends growing up that almost none of us had been to the beach before. And it was just right there. You might think like, well, why? It's a different kind of a life when you're over there. And we were asking her, why? And she said, just, there's nothing but gangsters and nerds. And I thought about that, and I'm like, I'm not a gangster. So that kind of narrows it down, huh? And then she graduated, and it's really funny, actually. She went to a really nice high school. She was my neighbor. And she went to a really nice high school. I went to a high school that had razor wire and armed LAPD officers on campus. And you can guess, why did she go to a better high school than me?
Because she was smart.
No.
Damn.
Not even that.
She probably had money.
No. Money, she was my next door neighbor. We lived with him. Because the school that she went to needed Latinas to fill up quotas. So they would bust them in to meet diversity quotas. And I was in there going like, can I go? They're like, nah, you go to that one. My high school had almost 4,000 students, 4,000, which is, here we have like 2,500. And it was like 3,800 students, it was almost 4,000. And there were literally, I'm not making this number up, there were 7 white people on campus. And people always ask, like, do you know who they were? No. I was looking all the time. See if I can. And it wouldn't be much. Yeah, we had twinsies. Yay! It wouldn't be much of a gang, but it would barely be a basketball team. It wouldn't even be a baseball team. But anyway, so she would say that. And then she ended up graduating, and she went to college. And when she got to college, we were talking, and one day she was just like in this deep depression. And I go, well, what's the deal? And she's like, I made a huge mistake getting married. Why? What happened? She said, no, he's great, but she said, there's so much more in the world than gangsters and nerds. As soon as she went to college, she was exposed to a whole bunch of different people that she would never have been exposed to before. And then in her mind, because she would never allow herself to associate with anybody except for people from the neighborhood. And so she stayed with him. They're still married today. They have 3 or 4 kids, and life has worked out pretty well. He's a good dude, Her mom hated her husband. Her mom loved me. She called me Esquivito. And She would call her husband him.
Okay.
Him.
That was gonna go on a boom.
What's that?
Nothing.
But the point is that that was the air that she walked around in. That was the water that she swam in. She didn't notice that there was so much more out there. And this is the way that a lot of times trauma works. We don't even notice it because it's just natural and normal to us. There are traumatic experiences that shape us violently, and there are some that affect us suddenly, throughout. And I would suggest to you that the kinds of things that we consume, they either affect us, or they indicate that we've been affected. Let's say that again. But the things that we consume, I mean in terms of like media, they either affect us, or they reflect or they reflect how we've been affected. In other words, if there are things that appeal to us, and we're like, yeah, think about what you're cheering on. Think about the stuff that you listen to that you poo-poo and won't even give a chance to because it doesn't align with what you already have in your mind. In other words, it doesn't align with what your character currently is. And again, it's been shaped by the things that we've experienced. It's a weird thing that we're very quick to point out how quickly everybody else is affected and shaped by their experiences, but not us. We're different. It's like when we want to censor speech. We don't want free speech. Why? Because man, it's going to piss people off. It's going to do this. Well, how come you can hear it? Well, I'm not affected the way most people are. You don't think that most people are affected the way most people are? Why is it that you can handle it, but nobody else can, or very few other people can? And besides that, what gives you the right to stand in moral judgment, or moral authority rather, of everybody else, to stand in judgment of all being in existence, to say, here's what should be allowed for everybody else. Not for me, but for everybody else. These are hard questions. And you might say, like, we shouldn't have to, people shouldn't be allowed to say certain things because if I hear it, man, I'm going to go off the edge and I'm going to, I can't handle it and I'm going to go join a militia group and I'm going to, would you? Well, not me, but everybody else. Okay. Be honest with ourselves, know ourselves. Questions? Comments, concerns, complaints, criticisms, critiques?